Hello everyone and welcome to the Midnight Pre-Patch. You've been waiting for it, I've been waiting for it, we've all been waiting for it for a long time. This is just getting into it. This is going to be a pretty comprehensive guide going into Devourer specifically for the pre-patch. So whether you're doing keys or you're just doing raid, obviously it's all just for fun. You know, you can't get cutting edge, you can't get AOTC, you can't get those kinds of achievements. You can still get mythic mounts, but at the end of the day, pre-patch is just for fun, kind of getting us into the new X pack. So this will be a pretty comprehensive guide as to rotation, talents, trinkets, consumables, stats, all the above. Be sure to like and subscribe, and let's get into it. So talents first. We know that's what everyone wants to see first is talents. Talents in general are pretty static. You don't really have a ton of wiggle room with points. But just to start off, this is Void Scarred single target. This is our top simming single target build for the pre-patch. Something you're going to note on my screen here is that I am not talented into Collapsing Star. And you might say, well, isn't that the whole reason the spec exists? You would be partially correct once we get to level 90 and we have Apex talents. As of right now, Collapsing Star on pure single target is not really worth pressing. The reason being is that the Apex talents in Midnight really amp up Collapsing Star damage, and without them, Collapsing Star just is a little weaker than it should be. But once you get into AoE scenarios, then it really amps up. But this is the pure single target build for Midnight, and all these will be linked down below in the description as well. Now, this is a very similar build. This is a Void Scarred Cleave / Void Scarred Mythic Plus build. You're generally not going to play Void Scarred much in Mythic Plus. Obviously, you can. The main points we're kind of moving around here. Soulforged Blades and Devourer's Bite are taken out so that we can get to Eradicate. And we notably have Soul Shaper as well to amp up that Eradicate damage. So this build is primarily going to be played in Cleave raid encounters. Soul Hunter's a really good example. Forge Weaver Raz is a really good example. But even in fights where you only have ads for like a few seconds, like Mythic Plexus Sentinel or even something like Soulbinder, especially with where we're at right now, I would say you could probably run the single target build and be fine. But for Cleave fights, this is kind of where you're gonna want to be. Same for like Dimensius. I think you're running single target. But obviously, you know, your results may vary as we go through the pre-patch pretty extensively. So this is our Mythic Plus build. This is where Annihilator kind of gets its time to shine in AoE damage. We are taking Collapsing Star here. We do not have any melee talents, and we're just a fully ranged build, you know, amping up with Voidfall and things like that. And also, you know, getting that big Eradicate damage as well. Something to note as well, at least with our current sims for Midnight and the pre-patch, our builds here are pretty similar, if not the exact same, as they are currently on the beta. So it should make transitioning a little easier as well. But these are the three main talent builds that we're going to be sort of messing with going into pre-patch. This is kind of what we've cooked up. If you really want to play Annihilator single target, it's about 4 to 5% behind. I think maybe 6%. You're just dropping Eradicate for Void Glare boon. That's the only point that changes here for the ranged build. Otherwise, stays completely the same. Now, for rotation, getting into rotations, gonna start with Void Scarred. I'm going to use the Cleave build for the example here, just because it kind of builds on some conditionals a little bit. But Void Scarred in general, and this is gonna kind of come into Reap as a button. Reap itself, even after the buff it got a little earlier on the 14th, it's still not a button we're pressing on cooldown, especially for playing Void Scarred, unless there's a few conditions. So when we're talking about pure single target Void Scarred, you know, in that pure single target build, we don't have Soul Shaper, but we also don't have Collapsing Star, but we do have Moment of Craving. The thing to consider when talking about Moment of Craving, especially when you're playing Void Scarred, is since I don't have Eradicate and I don't have Voidfall to kind of spend those reaps on to trigger the Voidfall meteors, you honestly, this is basically a talent that's being used to get you to your next meta. If Moment of Craving will get you there, otherwise it's, and it has to be, you know, it has to be at least 9 to 10 souls. It really has to be that high number of souls to be worth casting, which that's something we've kind of brought up time and time again on this channel. But just in general, that thing to note with Reap for Void Scarred is, if I'm in pure single target, if I'm playing the pure single target build where I don't have Eradicate, you know, I'm just pressing it for that specific reason. If I'm playing Void Scarred and Cleave or Mythic Plus, I'm pressing it after every Void Ray because it's triggering Eradicate, and that Eradicate is really strong on AoE. But before we get further into rotation, talking about rotation, I think it's really important to point out that I wouldn't really call this a rotation. I'd rather just call it a spell priority. And the reason for that is there's a lot of variance in the Devourer rotation that you're building towards things and you're trying to maintain things, but that doesn't mean that things are going to happen at set periods of time with, you know, variance in like soul generation and things like that. So I'll put the spell priority for Void Scarred up on the screen right now.
Work.
For the Void Scarred rotation, you're always going to start with the Hunt into that melee combo, and then Void Blade into the melee combo, and then just going into your basic spell priority. So I'll cast the Hunt, Hungering Slash, Void Step, Void Blade, Hungering Slash, Void Step, Consume until I can press Void Ray, and then you can walk around and pick up a couple souls while you're doing this. Void Raid, I have Eradicate, so I'm going to press that, and now I can Void Meta, and then I'm doing that again, but I'm now scary and purple and empowered, so on and so forth. And that's kind of where we are. And now that I'm in meta, my goal is to stay in meta as long as I can still, because that's just how this, I guess my best explanation is that's just how the spec plays. But now we're out of meta, and then we're just doing that again. But the only real difference that's going to take place is, you know, if I didn't have Eradicate talented. And then Reap basically falls to the bottom of my list in terms of spell priority. But especially for pre-patch, you know, it's easy to pick up, but you're going to definitely notice some nuances in content when you're doing content that don't really come across on a training dummy. So when we're talking about Annihilator for rotation, the thing to keep in mind that kind of differs from Void Scarred is that Reap priority that we kind of talked about earlier. With Voidfall, Consume has a 35% chance to generate 1 stack, as well as Void Ray. Fully channeling Void Ray also generates a stack. And then when you get to 3 stacks, you press Reap, it summons meteors on the ground. We're all happy. So that makes it so Reap becomes a higher priority button because of the fact that, you know, I want to trigger my meteors, but I also want to press Eradicate. So that sort of brings that up in priority. If you're playing single target Annihilator, the only difference is going to be you're pressing Reap for meteors, and that's basically it. And if a Moment of Craving will get you to a collapsing star. So for Annihilator rotation,
Work. Job's done.
We're, you know, working with the basics here. You're just going to start with Consume until you build up to the Void Ray, which, you know, it's going to take a little longer than it does for Void Scarred, but that's just part of playing Annihilator. Once I do that Void Ray, you're going to get the proc up here. This purple on the sides means that your next Reap will trigger Voidfall, so I'm going to press Eradicate, and now I can go into meta. So when you go into meta, you will also get 3 stacks of Voidfall, so it is good to spend those 3 stacks before you go into meta, because you're going to get another 3 when you go in. And then once I get to 30 souls here, I'm going to be able to cast Collapsing Star, and then I have a Voidfall proc as well I can spend, Void Ray, and so on and so forth. And then you just go back to your regular form, and you're right back to the original rotation. Something to note for Eradicate is that it technically isn't actually doing more damage than Reap. It's just making Reap AoE. So when you're in a Mythic Plus build or a Cleave build and you're running Eradicate, in AoE, you're always eradicating. But if you're in single target, the same rules will apply for a single target Reap that they do for Eradicate, because it's not doing anything extra to any other targets. Let's talk stats and crafting for pre-patch. Stats, general rule will be Mastery is greater than Haste, is far greater than Crit, is far greater than Verse. If you're playing single target Annihilator, Haste will be greater than Mastery, but otherwise, general rule is Mastery is greater than Haste. But as always, you should be simming your character to see what gear you have is best for you, what combinations, etc. And then for crafting, for Devourer, it's pretty simple. You'll craft a Warglaive with the Darkmoon Sigil Ascendance, and then you'll also craft a Writhing Armor Banding as well to just double the effect of that. This Writhing Armor Banding can be on basically any piece that is technically an off piece for you. Wrists, belt, or an off tier piece. Shoulders are probably our worst tier piece, so you can craft shoulders if you want. You cannot put Writhing Armor Banding on jewelry, just keep that in mind. Now, for trinkets. I'm going to borrow my good friend Fixer Sotho for a second, because I actually don't have the best trinkets on this character, but that's okay. Our best trinkets in all situations are Lily of the Eternal Weave and Diamantine Void Core. Lily is from Ecodome Aldani. Diamantine Void Core is from Fractalus in Manaforge Omega. Now, this does not mean that there aren't other trinkets that are also good. Salia's Secret Technique is also very good, assuming you get Mastery or Haste from the target you're using it on. Empowering Crystal of Anubicage is very good. Arakara Sackbrood is also very good. And I would say our third best trinket in general is As Hikarin Parapodia. I had to say that a few times. If you're just saying, I have got plenty of dinar, I'm just going to buy what's best, Diamantine Void Core, Lily of the Eternal Weave. And as always, if you have other trinkets, you can always sim them to see how they're kind of stacking up. Now, for enchants and gems, weapons, I would just throw Stonebound Artistry on both Cloak, Chant of Winged Grace, Chest, Crystalline Radiance, Legs, Sunset Spellthread, which I actually don't have on PTR right now, but Sunset Spellthread, it's on the screen. You can see it. Something to note, if you're an avid Havoc and Devourer player and you don't want to switch between the two frequently, there is a charged armor kit that will just give you main stat, whatever main stat of your spec. It'll just give you a little bit less, but you won't have to swap between the two if you swap often, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Bracers, you'll use Chant of Armored Avoidance. Boots, Defender's March, and both rings will use Radiant Mastery. This could change based on your current stat weights as well. Like always, sim your character for those kinds of things, and it'll tell you these are just general guidelines. As for gems, you're always going to use one Culminating Blasphemite, and then you'll want to fill them with separate colors of Masterful Gems. Masterful Emerald, Masterful Sapphire, and Masterful Ruby, and then the rest of your slots will use Quick Onyx. And then for consumables, for a flask of Alchemical Chaos, or you can use the base Mastery Flask. Combat Potion, just Tempered Potion. Mana Oil, Algari Mana Oil. Food. These are assuming Hardy, but Beladar's Bounty or Feast of the Midnight Masquerade, depending on what situation you're in. And that is Devourer Demon Hunter in the Midnight pre-patch. I can't express how excited I am for everyone to get their hands on it, and I can't also express how grateful I am for everyone that's been watching and being supportive. It really means a lot to me. Otherwise, I am really looking forward to playing with everyone in the Midnight pre-patch, and I hope this guide was able to give you an idea of where to start and get some practice on the spec before the expansion comes out. That's it for me today. And if you have any questions, just put them in the comments, or you can ping me on the Fellhammer Discord. I'm always pretty responsive, so I'll get to you as best as I can. But otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day.